Hello, and welcome to the Voices of the Australian Alumni, a brand new podcast series presented by the Australian Consulate General in Mumbai. I am your host, Tejas Nair, a proud Australian alumnus, culture entrepreneur, and a new media artist. With this series, we hope to shine a light on successful Australian alumni, learn about how they have adopted to the new normal, and discuss the future for the sectors in which they operate. Today we're speaking to Sunaina Jaswal, who is the Club Development Officer at Tennis Queensland and works on building participation in the sport and promoting club development in the southwest region of Queensland. We're going to be discussing sports as a channel to forge new and stronger relationships between Australia and India through the lens of her own personal experience as an alumni as well as a professional currently working in Brisbane, Queensland.
Hey Sunaina, how's it going?
Hi, I'm well.
It's a pleasure to chat with you. Do you want to maybe give our listeners a quick introduction on yourself and where you're from and how you found yourself in Brisbane?
Thanks, Tejas. Well, I moved to Australia 5 years ago, specifically to do a master's in sport management. At that point, just a little background, I've always been very invested in sport, right from childhood. So my family we've all been ardent sports people, just played. My dad's a golfer. And I think that kind of inspiration and start came from him. So I did find myself putting my hands and feet into different things. So in university, I did sociology, and I did feel like I was just doing it to tick certain boxes off, and there was always this desire to do what I wanted, like whether that was on court or off court, right from a younger age, to be involved in sports. So that was the reason why I moved to Australia to specialize. Just found that the education system, there was a lot more that I could have gotten out of it, and then been able to take that theory and put it down into practice. But yeah, it's been a great journey. I'm sure we cover a lot of that in the conversation as well. And at the moment, I'm working as a tennis development officer for Tennis Queensland. So the role is with a lot of external stakeholders and more of like community engagement and supporting and educating people in being able to, have sustainable facilities as well as sustainable resources or succession planning and things like that at clubs, but very recently also working very closely with schools on the Gold Coast.
Obviously, India and Australia are both countries where sports is huge, right? It's in the mainstream in both countries. It's part of everyday life. It's extremely passionate conversations in every household, more or less. But from an infrastructure and from a development perspective, you've played and studied sport in India as well as in Australia. What was your sort of key takeaway from that transition? What were the first things that stood out to you about how sports as a culture and a community activity functions in Australia as opposed to India?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question as you bring it up, because I think you've hit the nail on the head when you mentioned community. With my conversations with how in the past 5 years that I've had since I've been in Australia, is that India is undoubtedly, say, 10 to 15 years behind the Australian sporting, the structure, the landscape, and the industry as such. But I think it's a lot more. It's a cultural shift at the same time. When we're talking about the community, and I can take a few examples from where I'm at now, they've been, kids start off with, they're introduced to different programs, and tennis would be the best example that I can give you with. We have like, for young girls, you've got like future leader programs that are done by the national body for like, for both men and women, young girls and boys. You've got emerging leader programs. I think all of that really makes a difference into empowering and making kids confident at a younger age. Also taking all the resources that you give them, and then how can they go back into the community club. So we play a very strong role as a state body to actually link this younger generation into the community clubs that in my role that I've worked with very closely, and then building that culture from a very, very young age. So, as part of your pathways in tennis, for example, you play, competitive play, social play. You go through different stages. I'll cover that with, modified tennis, and then come into an age and a level that you're comfortable with holding a full size racket, and then from there going on. So that's the on court stuff of things, but even at the off court, when you hit 14, 15, there's so many opportunities for you to get involved, volunteer, just, and that's the succession planning that makes a difference, because you're actually introducing them to sport from a very, very young age. And some of us, yes, have had that, have been lucky to have that exposure. But from a family point of view, I think back home, it was more the sport or on the field or on the court. And, it was fun and whatever reasons you played it for. But just having that professional guidance, even with what is possible when you say sport, for a young girl or a young boy and what they can do in that industry.
I feel what you said is so integral to what sport means around the world, whether it's tennis, football, cricket. All of these things are extremely personal and emotional to a lot of these countries as well. And young kids really connect with it at a deeper level once they start playing it and following it avidly.
Yeah, so I just think that when people connect on something deeper, irrespective of what tradition, cultures, or backgrounds you come from, that in itself is a massive barrier that you've crossed in your differences to start with. I'll give you my example. When I moved to Australia, the first thing that I did, I love tennis, but I could have gone and joined like a club and started playing my fixtures, and but it is an individual sport to a certain extent. Though there are team opportunities that we are trying to build now, but when you look at it as an individual sport, so my second sport that I've always played was football back home. So the first thing was I just joined a football team, like a women's team, in Melbourne, and that was so good for me to just meet people, put myself like in a surrounding where I don't feel like, oh, it's hard for me to make friends, because sport, it's so easy to, you're on the same wavelength, you're meeting people from different backgrounds, from different parts of the world who've come to study in Australia. So globally as well, and I think we cover that later with, but there's so much that's now been happening internationally and building those global relationships in sport, and that I see as just supporting each other no matter which part of the world you're in, to be able to actually use the resources that are there. People are sharing a lot more, people are connecting, people are and I think that's important. Maybe there's been a lot that's come out of the pandemic, because we've all suddenly moved into this digital mindset of work, and I think that there's so many negatives that could come out of last year and with now what's happening, but that is a massive positive for all of us, like the webinars, seminars, live events. There's no end to it. So we've seriously like got a major opportunity here to collaborate a lot more universally, I think.
And I think now more than ever, with the kind of year we've had, it's become very apparent that the world is actually quite small, and the same problem can affect everyone around the globe at the same time. And that in turn has shown us that things like the internet and live broadcast and just bringing people together over the internet is going to be a really powerful tool going forward across domains. Now, I want to focus in a little more from the global to the relationship between India and Australia. Now, most people listening to this, I'm sure, will be familiar with the India-Australia sporting relationship through cricket, obviously, because it's the most widely known, and you have a lot of Australian cricketers playing in India through Premier League and other things, and vice versa, you have Indian cricketers playing in Australia. But beyond cricket, how would you describe the sporting relationship between India and Australia, and also the cultural relationship driven through sports, whether it's food, whether it's fashion, whether it's just personalities becoming everyday names at the family dinner table, and so on?
Yeah, so I think I did mention this, that, the fact that Australia has such a developed sporting structure and industry, there's so much that you can pick up from them. So, I mean, in terms of you're looking at, let's say, for example, we're looking at certain best practices that Australia may have when they're talking about the sporting industry. We're looking at, gender equality. That is one major thing that I can think of, whether that's at the workplace or whether that's even, um, you know, uh, opportunities for playing sports. So, best practices from Australia, probably potentially, where India can learn so many things from there. At the moment, there's been this big wave of the private sector in India as well. And undoubtedly, that's come because there's been a massive consumer base for sports. And that's happened over the past couple of years. And that, in terms of having, private um, companies come on board, they're going beyond just that relationship with the public sector to have, say, infrastructure development or something. So there's funding and things like that coming in. However, and at the same time in Australia, I'm just using this as a parallel example. You've got there's no dearth of private companies. Everyone's in sponsorships, grants, fundings, even for communities. So I'm not only talking about the high performance sport and athletes. I'm also talking about community level. They're grassroots. There've been grants and fundings that have come out from like oil and gas companies that have CSR initiatives and things like that. However, I do feel that there's a difference, and those are the things that we can learn from, because everything that happens still happens under the banner of a national, a state, and a local body that is then working aligned with these private sectors in some form or the other. And as much as we sit on paper and there's so much strategy and planning and this and that, if we have that basic structure right and ways of working right, I feel that that entire process of us developing, whether that's in sports medicine or whether that's in better infrastructure or resources, goods, equipments, whatever that may mean that we take from Australia, that would reflect a lot, because there is a massive structural change as well. Just an opportunity or learning from the Australian format of how these grants and funding opportunities are also available for, say, community clubs or community sporting facilities that want to be there. You want to have a plan in place where you've got your funds put together and sinking funds aside to be able to meet your liabilities that you have in any facility, or any, if you've got courts that are ripping out, what's the plan of action in order to prepare to get that done. So that's actually very, whether that's private council or the government, that's very streamlined. Each year there are numerous kinds of grants and fundings coming out. Also in terms of like workshops and conferences, what are the different subject matters that they're covering, whether that's if India is, for example, looking at certain tech that they need in order to enhance high performance sport. So how can we take that information and build on that relationship with the Australian government or the High Commission to then further translate that into a partnership to then get the most out of it. So a number of ways we can collaborate. There's a few examples that I've just got in there.
Absolutely. Obviously, there's pros and cons of the sporting industry both in Australia and India, like anywhere else in the world. There are some things either or country do extremely well, and then there's room for improvement as well in both cases. But I want to focus on India for a little bit, considering you've played the sport at a national and domestic level in India, as well as now seen how it functions in a country like Australia. I want to get your perspective on there's all these people and infrastructure and roles and communities built around bringing that sport alive, which is often not in the mainstream in India. How do you think one could encourage more people to look at those sort of roles within the sport and not just the athlete that you see on television? How do you get them to how does one popularize the roles of management and representation and infrastructure and strategy within sporting?
I think there's just two parts that I'll just break up my answer into. One is obviously the non-mainstream sports and the focus around that, and how to encourage people to my views of how I think that best people could be. I think education is key with that bit. Like there's so why is cricket so big in India? Because ever since we were little, that's the one thing that will always play on your television sets. Like broadcasting for cricket, ever since I was a little kid, has been something that's been massive. And over the past few years, you've seen other sports like the ISL. So in terms of that, I think it was a year before I left for Australia where, I actually saw friends and family all go in and actually want to be in the stadium to watch soccer and football. And I think that was just absolutely great. So it is. I think it comes down to that cultural shift as well. It is a little bit of like educating people about, there are these sports. This is. I'll give you an example where when I must have been probably 18 or 19, where one of my friends from Manali actually told me about Shiva Keshavan, who is for luge. He basically has represented India in a number of Winter Olympic sports and won various medals. However, he's always done it himself. There were a lot of challenges for him in order to, get the right kind of equipment or just have the right kind of resources or even financial funding and support from private organizations at that time that wasn't there. So, and I think, I'm not sure, one of his parents is Italian and the other one, I think his mom is Italian and dad is Indian. And he was actually offered to represent Italy at some point, and then he went on to say, no, I want to represent my flag, my country, because I've lived here all my life. But often in his interviews, and I've heard some of them where he's spoken about his struggles to finance his career, and he's even had to borrow sleds in order to, practice. And I can't even begin to imagine where he would have practiced in Manali with like no infrastructure for the sport. So it does come that there is talent. Now we have billions of people living in our country. There is talent. It's how you nurture that talent, how you educate that talent, how willing are we to invest in, whether that's private or it's the government, willing to invest in sports that are not categorized as mainstream. However, there's so much potential because of this talent. Those are the sports that could be potentially getting us more medals for India. So that's just a thought that we can like ponder on. When it came down to researching, I want to do something in sport, but obviously I'm not good enough to get back out there and be on court. Your skill sets in any industry are very transferable. So if you are, if you're marketing or a PR specialist, if you are, if you come from a project management background, or even if it's in a finance company, or you have that skill set, it's transferable. If you have it's amazing what you can do if you've got the skill set and have the passion for something and put it together. And it just comes down to that. So I think with a lot more private companies coming up, even with bigger companies where they've got contract work for, say, sporting initiatives that they do, there's so much, even if you start small, there's so much capacity for you to actually go out there and pursue your passion and then transfer those skills into something that you want to do. So when you talk about management really broad, so you could get into, say, the strategic side of things, governance and You're talking about policy making, and that's a massive chunk of sport altogether. So that's sport governance and policies. Then you've got sport marketing. So I myself come from like a marketing and a PR background as well, very much like my sister. So yeah, so I was doing a lot of PR. When I was in India, I was doing corporate communications for PVR, based in Delhi. And yeah, and there's a lot in my role in the tennis development role when I joined Tennis Queensland as well, where I was working more regionally. So I had those relationships going with local media as well. So again, even in your role, like, you can always go over and above with where your passion lies within that sporting I may be doing a broader role, but there's so many aspects within that. So you've got like sport PR, sport marketing, you've got governance, you've got broadcasting, which is a whole different study that you can do on that. Sport medicine, psychology. You may have actually studied psychology, or be a trained professional in your field, and now you realize that you're passionate about sport and that's something you want to be in. So you can easily transfer into and find yourself opportunities within that as well. So just like any other industry, we've got, like, I think sports should not be seen as a secluded one, or you need this to get into that. Yes, you do need the understanding and you do need to have a little bit of passion and know what you're talking about, but by the end of it, it shouldn't be treated as a separate one. It's very much transferable.
Absolutely. And that leads me on to my next point, where you mentioned education is obviously a huge role in nurturing and recognizing talent that can then sort of find its way up to the highest level. That leads me to your work right now. I understand a huge passion for you right now is representation within the sport, and creating opportunities for young athletes and young children that might, be suffering from disabilities, or they might be part of a cultural minority. And I do understand that there are challenges with that sort of work, and it's also a very sensitive subject to approach, no matter where in the world. But I want to know your perspective on doing that kind of work within tennis, and how you feel that efforts like that can create a more inclusive and diverse environment within sports culture.
When I moved to Australia, I started working with tennis and had my first encounter with having to do, working with kids with an intellectual disability. I'll say it up front, I wasn't equipped with it. I felt that I wasn't equipped with the resources. I myself felt that I wasn't in a position, I wasn't sure with what to say, what not to say. And those are the things that hold us back, because we just haven't put ourselves out there. We don't know. So it just came down to getting, and obviously Tennis Australia has all the support that you can get in order to build the space up. So we've had that kind of support. We worked in teams, and shared that resource and knowledge. So I think it's like as simple as, are you looking them in the eye when you're having a conversation? Is there someone sitting on a wheelchair? Are you actually making the effort to, have a conversation with them, with where you're looking? Are you talking too much? Less words, more action. Once you're aware of these things, you find yourself in a better position to be able to, be a part of something like this. And of course, it comes with passion. That also, being Indian, being in Australia, I think that inclusion and diversity space is big for me. So when CAL community, so that's a culturally and linguistically diverse community. So wherever you're from, like, how are we doing events around that? Give you an example of the ATP Cup. That was the first time that we had the ATP Cup last year, and we had group matches that happened in Brisbane, different parts of the country, and then they played the finals in Sydney. My role at the ATP Cup in Brisbane was consulate engagement, and that was basically 8 countries coming in and liaising and having a chat to the consulate to see how can we actually create that, because this is the first time. It's like Davis Cup, yes, but this was more like the World Cup of tennis happening in Australia, where we try to bring communities together. So whether that was through social media forums, having like different kind of meet and greet. So Serbia, you had like Djokovic in Serbia, you got the Serbian consulate, work with them to get an entire community to meet and greet with him, and all of that makes so much difference in actually building the community's interest to come back and play tennis. So yeah, I think those are the kind of opportunities we have. We have the platforms, we've got international sport, we've got the resources, we've got the infrastructure, but what we do around it to engage your community, those are the things that would go a long way in making a difference with either that's women in sport or whether that's we're talking about working with people with a disability. The other one, I think, with another good experience I had was we came up with an adult. Tennis Australia has this adult program, which is open court sessions, which is mainly social tennis. So no competitive play. You come down for 90 minutes. There's music, there's food. You just come and play tennis. We do a couple of fun drills, and we actually ran that with including men and women on a wheelchair and people just together, and everyone was there having fun. Like some of them were even better than us in a wheelchair. Like they're hitting the ball back, and I had to run for it. And I was like, goodness me, I didn't see that coming. So yeah, like sometimes you're just surprised. I think inclusion is not always about doing a separate camp or separate thing for them, but also including them in like your aligning them with your main not mainstream, but mainstream tennis camps that you have. So most of it, I think it all comes down to education as well. And I think that's where education and training of the coaches, and giving them these resources, this would also be a massive thing I feel India and Australia can collaborate on, where, your trainers, your teachers, how can we change our teaching styles? How can we engage students better? What if we don't understand the language? What are the different ways that we need to make an effort to? I've actually helped someone at Tennis Australia build, they were building PowerPoint presentations for different communities to hand them over as resources to tennis clubs. So they had done one on the Chinese community. So basic things. I'm not going to get into Chinese, I have no idea. But I did the bit on Indian communities. So, identifying like different, what are the important festivals for us? Just take Diwali as an example, put in a couple of dates there that are big for Indians. It doesn't only mean playing tennis, but it also means opening out your clubhouse or your facility for hire so that people from different communities can come and be a part of it. Probably have like a Indian theme night, where you've got that kind of, it's just basic event ideas that you can do. And just demonstrate that you as a club or you as an organization are willing to make that extra effort to learn about your members and learn about people coming to your facility. And I think the last one would also be like, obviously all of this requires, as you said, is sensitive. So there has to be a lot of core values that we need to respect. We need to be patient, again, adaptable, just to be able to encourage, them and also feel comfortable with working in that space. Tennis Australia works a lot with modified sports. So, if there's someone with low vision capabilities playing, the balls are bigger. So like, I don't know how to explain it, but they're massive and they've got like a little bell attached to it. So you can actually hear it. And then we modify the game saying, let it bounce twice instead of once. So these are just a few examples to say, there's a lot of resources out there to make it inclusive. And it's just about that cultural shift, how much, as I said, we all have to do our bit in order to make that possible.
Correct, absolutely, and it's also important, as you said, that it is a human conversation and not just a sporting thing where we can organize, say, a separate event altogether and then call that inclusion. It's also important to have them a part of every conversation and not just the conversations reserved for that community. I just got to say, personally, I find it fantastic that there is an environment and an ecosystem within sports to have these kind of conversations. And I think it could be really interesting to see how sports can help bring this conversation to the mainstream. It helps just bring people closer together, no matter where they are or where they're from and what they represent. Now, speaking about the globe and bringing people together, I would like to touch upon the year that we've just had. COVID has absolutely, changed the way that one would look at the world and think of, relationships and building opportunities globally. I want to know your opinion on how COVID has impacted sports, because sports has always been something that involves a lot of people coming together in various locations, whether small or big gatherings.
Well, I think everyone's first reaction to COVID would be super negative. But it's been a very tough year. It's been for everyone right across the globe. There've been, I think, for our sector, there've been so many workforce and operating model changes. I can speak out of experience for what we've gone through. The positions, I mean, I can't even begin to imagine what executives of top companies have had to work with in order to make those decisions as well. After all, you are talking about people's livelihoods. So, very tough year. At the same time, I feel like it's given us a little bit of time to step back and reset. Um, and I would like to, as an Evercoach, just try to touch a little bit more on the positives of it. It just with making people a lot more flexible in adapting to these changes. So whether that means you take a few weeks off, you reset, and you come back and you are willing to work with the new ways that are put forward. I can say that for the organization that I'm working with, there's a lot of focus on your mental and personal well-being as well. It's just that over the years, we've all been in this race of getting things done, and we've been so fast-paced. And when we got that time off in March, everyone had the time to ask each other that, but how are you? Like, are things okay with you? And connect, like for me, I think I was just on the phone. I haven't had so much phone talking to, time over the past 2 years to talk to my family as much. So that in itself, like, even though we're really far away, there's a lot of people connecting, whether within the country or outside of it. So I think that's a positive because there's a massive shift on focusing on mental health, and that has very often been overlooked in the fast-paced environment that we work in. The big one that we spoke about before when we started was also the focus on digital relationships, just with the way we work. Sorry, the digital enablement side of things. So it's not only with having live conferences and events and things like that, but also this being an opportunity for a lot of community clubs that I've been working with to actually say, wait a minute, we can't go do this face to face. So this is my opportunity to learn to use these management system models online, which for sport in return is you're enabling people be better presentation, but also a massive on the data side of things for sporting organizations. So I think that's been a major shift that I've seen in the past 8 to 9 months. It's been great just with the new systems that have come out. So we come up with a club managed, for example, management toolkit, which is like, you manage your memberships, you've got your payments, your website, everything in one system. And a lot more clubs are now happy to do that because they can communicate to their members directly, and people are not coming into the clubs. So that's one. I think in terms of bigger events, I'd say is this whole working in a bubble and in a safe environment. And with tennis at the moment, I'm sure everyone's across the challenges that the Tennis Australia has had to work with. Our team in Melbourne, including our CEO, has bent over backwards to one plan after another. So there's been a lot of contingency planning as well. Just, plan A, plan B, plan C, and work with that. You're working with the governments, the quarantining, what's that bubble going to look like? And I think that's a bigger discussion on how international relationships have gone, because the IPL did happen in Dubai, and now because of the success of how Dubai has handled these events during the time of the pandemic, also taking into consideration that in Melbourne there's a 2-week quarantine for everyone flying down. So working with these difficulties, you have, for the first time ever, global branding of the Australian Open and the qualifying happening at Dubai. So there are 128 tennis players from around the globe at the moment playing the women's qualifying Australian Open in Dubai. And who would have ever thought that? So it's been a year like no other, but it's amazing. It's amazing to see that when we do have to explore different opportunities, how flexible everyone is. And I'm not really sure on the lead time of what was worked around, but I'm certain that even the team in Dubai has had to work within, different plans and timelines, and, how have they worked around that bubble with the teams, with the staff, ensuring they're all separate from, people in UAE, and making sure that it's safe not only for the sport and the sports persons, but also for people in the community. So I think and the biggest one at that level of play is no fans. So that is obviously a very, very different experience for athletes, but also as like staff, because I've worked at a couple of major events through these 5 years. So I've had the chance to work at the 2018 Commonwealth Games, did the Brisbane International twice, Australian Open 2 years back, and then there was the ATP Cup as well. And it was the fans that made it what it was. Like, even for us as staff, when you see the stadium or the arena packed with people, all seats booked, people cheering for their favorite player, or like in the ATP Cup, we got the flags out and they're cheering for like their favorite team. It just gives you a sense of satisfaction in what you do, and 100% for the players. I can't even begin to imagine what that may be for them in working in that environment. That's a bit disheartening that we can't have them in. But at the same time, there are a lot of opportunities for broadcasting, live screening, different sporting businesses or channels that have invested their time in that. And this is an opportunity for them to capitalize on it as well. So pros and cons.
Yeah, absolutely. So much has changed because of the pandemic, and so many lives have been upheaved and thrown into disarray. I do think that the only way we can move forward from this sort of thing is to draw the positives wherever possible and use that as the energy to build whatever it is that comes next, or whatever the new normal might be. And in that process, I want to talk about where do we go next from here, considering the kind of year it's been and all the changes that this has brought to the infrastructure of sports, the consumption of sports, the experience of the athlete, and so on. How do countries like India and Australia, that are both powerful stakeholders in the world of global sports entertainment, how do they help revive the industry, so to speak? Because there's definitely changes, like you mentioned, the qualifying for an Australian Open being played in Dubai is a great example, right? No one could have expected that, but. Are there any similar things you think are on the horizon for countries like India and Australia to come together and work towards in this post-pandemic era?
I think this post-pandemic era, again, it's hard to say what it would be like, but with the way where personally I feel that shift going is, capitalizing on this digital forum that we have at the moment. There are a lot of new ideas, new, tech. What's the media consumption like? Whether this is this podcast, or do we go back to doing live conferences and live webinars and connecting people on the medium of that? Because as much as we say post pandemic, we don't know how many years it's going to take for it's nearly been a year. So it started last year in Feb, and now we're in nearly mid-Jan. So we don't know how long that's going to take. And until then, what we know is that we've got this model which we can stay connected with. And we know what are the things that India needs support in, and why not use this model, this channel in, and get the experts on calls like it has been happening. And I know the Australian High Commission has been really trying to capitalize on this to engage not only alumni but from university experts and things like that. There is, as part of that, a lot of if sporting government bodies are open to uh, utilizing, say Indian sporting body looking at an Australian university for research and development during this time to see, these are the things that we would like to bring back. Now, those things could be actually, I shouldn't say, I'm pretty sure would be a majority of it would be the financial side of things, because it's without saying every industry has suffered in some form or the other. There has to be a strategic recovery plan in place for how we're going to recover financially, whether that means within the sport, whether that means your staff, and whatever your focus may be. I think connecting to utilize those resources in order to start building on those plans now. When the pandemic happened in March, because we were not really internally within the organization, we were not really going out and doing our day-to-day jobs. We broke into project groups, and that was the first time we worked in project groups, and we all had some, whether that was a strategic plan that we were working on, whether that was women in sport, whether that was resources for clubs. And I think it's a great time for us to identify that, so that in post pandemic, we're ready, we're equipped with what. It's not that, oh, things have opened now, where do we go? We know where we want to go. And I think that pre-planning is going to save us a lot of time to come back when the borders open up, to just reset, to recover your workforces and just be refreshed. So I think, it's going to come back. It's going to come back to full stadiums. I have no doubt in that. Everyone wants to get out there. We've had a couple of AFL matches here, and the stadiums have been packed irrespective. So people are going to go out there and watch sports. So I don't see any of that change, and I'm sure all of that's going to come back. The massive shift that I said that I see is that a lot, maybe the digital side of things remains open, and this is the new way of working that we go about with. Broadcasting is going to be big as well post pandemic, because there are going to be so many events that are going to come in, and so that's a good opportunity for people within that business. But I think at the moment what we can do best is prepare ourselves for the best and the worst at the same time, and have contingency plans in place, because we've got to be ready with whatever life throws at us at this point.
Correct. And that leads me to my last segment of this conversation. We've spoken about so many things, but I like the last point that you just left off with, that preparing for whatever life might throw at us is definitely a great plan to begin with. And considering how the world has changed so much over the last 12 months, like you said, there are new models being explored. There's new infrastructure, new tools, new forms of content. Digital has blown up, and there's still a certain uncertainty of when, say, the live bit of fans in a stadium watching a game can actually come back at a regular sort of pace. And all of this sort of leads me to aspirants who are looking to enter the sports sector today in 2021. What direction would you point them in? What kind of research would you tell them to invest themselves in? What kind of advice would you share, having seen how things have changed, and where you would forecast it heading towards in the next few months and years to come?
I try to keep a positive forecast. So, I think it's a good time for people, say students wanting to come in and study, if that's something that you see with how you want your sporting career to start off on. So if you're looking at universities, I'd say research on the course that you want to do. Even within sport management, what is it that you'd like to specialize in? Different units within the broader sport management spectrum. Read about it a lot and see with your existing skill set. I think I touched upon this before in our conversation. See what your strengths are, your weaknesses in terms of, and that's why you'd be coming to study as well, in order to improve where you feel there's a gap and you need to do that. At the same time, I think this is a little bit of like from a career as well as personal advice as well, like researching the kind of city you'd like to live in. So if fast-paced city is something that you want to be a part of, Melbourne, there are lots of universities there. There may be someone who'd like to, be in more sunshine state probably, then that would be Queensland for you. So depending on the kind of courses you want to do, it's not only about Australia. Also, I think just broadly, it depends on what you're looking at, even personally, what your interests are. And I think that's very important when you choose something. Understanding that the volunteer opportunities and aspects of it, because as I said, here the competition gets harder because there have been people who volunteered from such young ages, build their networks. So put yourself in a better position to see, where do you see your strengths are and where could you volunteer, and just try to engage yourself in things like volunteer opportunities, internships, even through the university doing part-time work or any other opportunity. So for a lot of people, I think coaching, like if you've played some form of sport and you're coming to study in sport and you have, say, tennis was my sport, there were opportunities even without a course under my belt. There was also opportunities to coach younger kids or work under an established coach and do like a once a week, twice a week part-time job. So find out, if you're moving somewhere, look at your locality with what are the community clubs there, what are the potential, things that you can do or get involved with, and whether that's volunteering or part-time. And I think I touched upon my mentor as well, but potentially it's just like having that support from someone, whether that's your university professor or teacher or someone completely separate in your community club, but be ready to build on those relationships as well. And I think in the end it's just be flexible and adaptable. It's not easy when you pack your bags and move to another country all alone, but and be willing to reach out to people. I think that's very often that when you move to a new place, you're just not very confident to ask or say something because you're unsure. But I've always said there's no question is a stupid question. Like, if you find the right people, pursue your goals and be happy in the environment that you're in, I guess.
Yeah, amazing. Wow, I think that's great advice and certainly relevant to anyone looking for a career in sports and particularly studying in Australia. Well, on that note, I'm going to say thank you very much, Sunaina, for joining us on this chat. I think it's been really insightful to also get your perspectives on the sport of tennis, the infrastructure around it, and just global sporting relations, and a lot of other things. I do hope that sports does come back the way it used to happen before the pandemic, and we can, all have it as a channel of communication, dialogue, and cultural exchange, and just obviously enjoy the games as well. I just want to say that I'm really happy we got to have this chat, and thank you so much for sharing your perspectives.
No, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Once again, thank you, Sunaina.
You too. Thank you.